Hello and welcome. In this video, we're discussing the concept of space in Overwatch. Now, on the screen here, you can see we have a very basic, simplified version of what space looks like. But don't worry, we're going to get more complex later. As you can see here, we'll get there. So, here we have your team in the blue, your opponent's team in the red, and this middle neutral ground space, which is split up between yellow and green. Those two colors represent the two states that the neutral ground can be in, which is uncontested and contested, but we'll talk about that more later. So, the first thing I want to say about this concept of space is that just by being aware of it, it's going to really elevate your gameplay. While you're playing Overwatch, if you can just ask yourself the question, do we own this space? That's going to help you out a ton. It's going to allow you to make better decisions, and it's going to balance your level of aggression to make sure you're not being too aggressive or too passive. So, what are the guidelines for good space usage? There are three. One for each block, the U, the neutral, and the opponent. So let's talk about the U first. And hopefully as this video goes on, you're going to notice that each guideline is more important than the next. So hopefully we will revisit that later. So let's talk about the U. The rule here, or the guideline here, is very simple, and it's to use all of the space. Now, this may sound really simple, but we're going to see an example of a professional match where a team actually doesn't do this and they pay heavily for it. So super important, but also super simple. So cool. We will go over that more later. And just kind of to wrap this up, obviously this side is more important, right? Like you want to be pushing and maximizing from this direction. And as you do that, you'll typically lose this backside area, which is normal. That's okay. That area tends to become more neutral ground. But that's outside of the scope of this video. Maybe I could talk about that in a different video, but we won't be discussing that nuance today. But yeah, so just plain and simple, just trust your instincts. Just maximize this area and use it to its full potential. And again, we will see professional players actually make that mistake, make the mistake of not doing that, not following that guideline. So let's move on to the next one, which is the neutral ground. For this one, the rule is also very simple. Do not skip it. Do not just hop over this neutral ground. We see this mistake all the time at all levels of play. I see it in scrims, VOD reviews, professional matches, all the time. You'll see a Winston just do this. He'll just, oh, hey guys, actually even deeper. He'll just like, go here. That's no good. You always want to make sure that you are contesting and aware of what's going on in the neutral ground, to look for clues and hints and make sure that you're not just like leapfrogging over dangerous area into your opponents. A classic example is when a team gets a pick. It'll be a 6v5 after a pick. They get excited in the comms. They're like, go. And you'll see sometimes that goes wrong very frequently because of this guideline. So let's talk about that. Okay, so example, 6v5 after a pick. Winston says, go. He jumps into the opponent's side. Maybe he dies, and maybe like, an Ana or a Zen dies. And he goes like, what the heck, team? Like, how did we mess that up? Let's break it down. So, the Winston jumps in, he's in here somewhere, and typically what happens here very frequently is that he'll be out of line of sight from his backline, from his healers. So, they have to typically go into these more contested areas, the more neutral ground, as opposed to the safe space that you own, to be able to be into line of sight to heal the front line. And so obviously that sucks because they obviously don't want to just stay in the safe space and not heal you. So they're going to go into the more risky, aggressive space to heal you, but then that's where the problem lies. You've kind of, by doing this, you kind of stretched out your team in a way that's not good. So the Winston's here, he's almost certainly getting collapsed on and taking heavy fire, and their team, they might have a flanker set up. They get the easiest flank of their lives onto your Ana or Zen because you made them get into a bad position. Then they die, or maybe they have to use cooldowns in a way that they don't want to. Similarly, for the front line, for the tank who dove in, maybe Winston, his bubble gets burned down instantly, his jump pack's down, and then guess what? They probably just both die. And that's it. They died. Or they use cooldowns in a bad way that made the fight not go so great. And that's the best case scenario. And then sometimes what you'll see here is they'll wipe. What was a 6v5 turns into a 4v5 or worse. And also, let's talk about the DPS, because your DPS, they probably wanted to position themselves into more aggressive neutral ground space to start attacking. But when the Winston just decided to just go in, he he removed that ability from his DPS. So he puts himself in a bad position, he puts his healers in a bad position, and he didn't give his DPS time to get good positions. So all around, this is just bad. So how do we fix this? The answer is simple. Don't skip the neutral ground. As a team, kind of leapfrog your way forward into these more contested areas until you've kind of surrounded your opponents. Space out, get into the positions you want, and try to get your opponents into a ball. We're going to talk about that more actually in the last guideline for the opponent section. So hopefully that example kind of drives the point home. So what are some other things you can do besides kind of like pushing forward? And by the way, when you do push forward, you don't have, it's not like you can't use cooldowns. Like if you're a Winston and you want to get into position, you don't have to necessarily walk here. You could actually just leap, jump pack into these positions, right? Into these more neutral positions. And then you can start, poking your opponents. You don't always have to just jump in here. So please, walk and push forward. Don't be afraid to use cooldowns while you're doing that, but don't just go into the middle of your opponents, into the space that they own. Okay, what else can you do besides walking forward for the neutral space? Make sure you're checking corners. Huge. You don't want to get surprise flanked. Contest your flanks. Make sure that you are aware of the flanks that are open, and ideally kind of just feel them out a bit. Make sure that you're at least looking at that direction, and maybe if you're like a Zenyatta, you're throwing right clicks into a space to make an enemy think twice about flanking that spot. Let them know that that they're there. Cool. The last thing is rotations. Neutral space is super cool because that's typically where teams will rotate around. A good example is King's Row. This statue is a very cool place where you'll sometimes see teams rotate. The offense might go here, push this way, and then sometimes you'll see the defense in response to that rotate this way. So as a team, if you can be aware of of your opponent's tendencies, because maybe you've studied them, and obviously this is a little bit more for scrims and professional matches, but if you think that or based on their composition, you might think that, okay, they're going to rotate us, they're not going to do a different tactic. Okay, play off that. Since you know that this statue is kind of the pivoting point for the rotation, maybe just an idea, you might set up a Doomfist sneakily here, or maybe like here. If you're more risky, maybe around here somewhere, and then go for that surprise play where you get the punch, you get a kill, and the rest of your team goes for the collapse. Just as an idea. So if you can kind of play with this concept, it'll really kind of open up your mind to think of more creative plays. Cool. So hopefully that all makes sense. Neutral ground, probably the most important one to understand because it's probably the most complex. Now let's talk about the last rule, or last guideline, which is the opponent one. The idea here is very simple, and if you follow the first two, this one should be the easiest to execute, which is to suffocate your opponents. This is how you win games. When you suffocate them, you're going to push them into a tighter and tighter spot until they're squeezed so tight that, and if you watch any of my videos, you know that I say not to clump, right? So if you can force your opponents to clump up into a ball, that's great, and that's what you're doing here. So when you're clumped up in a ball, you're more likely to make mistakes, to trade ultimates in an unfavorable manner, etc., etc. So you never want to be clumped in a ball, but the flip side of that is that, you want to make your opponents clump up into a ball. Always a good thing. Well, let's say the vast majority of the time. And I think this kind of plays into why people don't like 2CP maps or assault maps. There's not a lot of space to work with on that point B, right? It's pretty frustrating to kind of have to engage on your opponents head on. And there's actually some nuances there that I don't want to go into right now, but I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like 2CP maps. Whereas you have payload maps, man, those streets phases are so much fun because there's so much fun to play because there's so much space to work with. So let's talk about how you do this. If you watch any of my videos, you know what I'm going to say now. Spread out. You want your team to spread out. You want to fill the map as much as possible. Use as much of the map as possible. You want to get multiple angles of attack. Sometimes I'll see flankers flank, and they'll kind of go for a shallow flank. So if your team is planning to dive this way, you get a flank this way. That's okay. You want to get those flanks that are coming from the sides or the back. That's going to get the best amount. That's how you're going to utilize the space on the map the most and get your opponents into that tight ball that you want them to be in. Again, what I don't want is this. Please don't just do this. It's so lazy. Contest, massage your opponents, push these flanks out, get deep, squeeze them tighter and tighter. That's where they're going to make mistakes. That's how you're going to win games from a strategic standpoint. Obviously, you can just out mechanic your opponents, but that's not what we're talking about today. So hopefully this makes sense. Let's start to look at some footage from professional matches. For our first clip, we're going to look at FNR GFE versus Rogue on Numbani. Let's set up some context. Rogue is on offense. They just took point A. They got some nice stagger kills onto the enemy Tracer and Diva. So this is sounding great. They're looking to really snowball through this streets phase of Numbani, as most teams do on this map, especially when you get stagger kills like that. Cool, so this is sounding great for Rogue. To make matters even better for Rogue, on this next fight, FNR GFE is going to disrespect the second guideline where they jump over and skip the neutral ground. And yeah, so again, that's sounding great for Rogue, right? But what happens? Because if you watch the match, Rogue had a really hard time for the streets phase. Excuse me. So why did that happen? The answer is simple. If you remember earlier, I mentioned how the guidelines are kind of on a tier where every guideline is more important than the next. So even though FNR GFE disrespects the second guideline, Rogue disrespects the first guideline, which is not utilizing all of the space that they had right to claim. They just didn't use it, and they pay heavily for it. So that is by far the more serious error. So again, they pay heavily for it. So let's talk about what they should have done. They should have used either or both of these locations and claimed it for their own. And I used green, and we're going to get back to that in a second. So they should have flipped them to their color. And just by going there, that's all you have to do is just be there, right? Just be a presence. And again, they didn't have to take both. Just the one would have been fine, but two is good too. And then by doing this, they limit the space that their opponents have. And then this kind of becomes the neutral ground where your opponents will try to fight you over. That's the point of contest. One of many. Again, I used yellow, and we're gonna get to that in a moment. So what does Rogue do? Rogue makes the mistake of kind of meandering around their payload, and then this kind of becomes, like, these spaces kind of become the neutral ground, the space where your opponents will fight you over, the points of contest. Not great. They give up so much space for pretty much no reason. So before we jump into the footage, I want to use this opportunity to talk about the green and the yellow. So green is uncontested space that your team has right to claim, that you can flip it to be the space that your team owns. Now, why? It's because, and in every game, hopefully you'll kind of apply this as necessary, but this is going to happen when your opponents don't have the resources to contest you. They don't have, maybe people are too low on health, maybe they're at a man disadvantage, as was the case here, et cetera, et cetera. So when that happens, you have to recognize that and be like, okay, I need to claim this space for my team and make it mine. That way, you get more ground, and et cetera, et cetera. That's a good thing. So let's compare that to the yellow space, the neutral ground, which is yellow. So maybe, like, I don't know, over here. Actually, let's say like right here. Typically, these are the kinds of locations where both teams can fight over, and yeah, that's basically it. It's the space that you should be looking to be expecting your opponents to fight you over. And so that's it. That's the key difference between the two. Green is space that you don't own, that you should be trying to get when it's left open, because again, your opponents do not have the resources to contest you. And yellow space is space that you should expect your opponents to fight you over. And in some cases, you wanna fight, like, that you might want to take away from your opponents. And that's kind of where, Overwatch gets its fast-paced dynamic action, where people are constantly in flux and people are rotating and things like that. So I don't want to talk too much about this, but hopefully that makes sense. Green means go, take it. Yellow means, be cautious. You're gonna have fights there. So it's really important to recognize the green, though, because that's gonna make sure that you can take space that is yours. So let's look at the video. So here, Rogue, again, they just took point A. They got a nice stagger kill onto Tracer. They're going to get a nice stagger kill onto this Diva. Maybe they killed her a little too early, but there she goes. Now, here's the problem. It looks like they're pressing forward. Okay, this is great. Go, go, go. And then they get cold feet and they back off. And I'm not quite sure why. This is pretty strange. And we're going to look at a video clip of how to do it correctly after this one. So hold on tight. So you can see here, they're a little bit timid. They had way more space to work with. And you can see Tracer kind of poking over there. That's decent. But it's too late now. That's it. They had the opportunity to get into positions and they didn't. Now here's the mistake from FNR GFE. Winston goes way too deep with that dive. And you can imagine, let me get the colors. Actually, let's go for a neutral color. If they had positioned a Tracer and or a soldier here, I don't know, maybe someone is in here, this opens up a lot of opportunities. They can go, and and it depends, because in this case, in this particular example, they'd have to be hidden, like kind of sneaky. They could then go for the collapse onto Winston and just blow him up because he wasn't expecting them to be there. Or, like we talked about earlier, maybe the flankers mess up the back line. And cut them off, and then the rest of the team can focus on Winston. There's so many options here when you set up correctly. But again, Rogue was not in the position to punish FNR GFE for their mistake because they didn't follow the first rule. They disrespected it. So hopefully that makes sense. And they didn't have to do it this way. They could have actually done something even more aggressive because earlier in my example, I was like, okay, I have Tracer and Soldier here, or I don't know, maybe someone's here. But you can even get more aggressive and start putting like the bulk of your forces up on this high ground and go for like, a really, really aggressive like chokehold onto your opponents, and play off that maybe. So there's this isn't really rigid. It's organic. There's lots of ways to kind of make it work. Cool. So what you're gonna see here is they just kind of get stuck here, and they're just not in the positions to kind of outmaneuver their opponents. They're just kind of looking for that head-on fight, which is fine for the defense side because, hey, they want long, drawn-out fights. And, yeah, you can see all these ultimates being traded, and, yeah, this is no good. So this takes a while. It takes them a long time to finally get this Streets phase, which you typically don't see on Numbani, for the most part. Cool. So let's look at how to do it a little bit better. Here we have KongDoo Panthera versus Envious. The moment KongDoo Panthera realizes they have this fight, they start immediately going for ground that is theirs, that is rightfully theirs. So there goes Rascal. He finishes up that fight. Now he's already on the next play. He's creating space for the Tracer to get up onto the high ground. So there goes Tracer. Now she's in a nice position where she's up here, and her opponents don't quite expect it. She's checking her corners. This is awesome, and she's looking for that play. And again, this isn't the only way to do this. You could also do it the other way, where you get really aggressive with your team and you just push forward. This is the sneaky way. This is where you get nice Dragon Blades, Tack Visors, Pulse Bombs, because those abilities are always better when your opponents don't expect it. It comes from behind, harder to juke, harder to react to, less time to react to. Positionally, it's just better in every way. And then from here, they snowball off this even harder, and they cruise through this Streets phase. Cruise. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, here we have Immortals versus Rogue. This one's pretty interesting because Immortals, I have to give them credit. They do a pretty good job of being very patient. They wait until the last moment to attack, like after the time goes down to 0. But it doesn't really matter because Rogue got the positional advantage and Immortals did not respond correctly to it. Immortals kind of disrespects the second rule. They basically go into the point and fight Rogue where Rogue clearly had the advantage there. So let's kind of play this out a little bit. So Rogue leaves this space open. This is where, Immortals is here. Rogue gives that up, and Rogue goes for the high ground, and they send Soldier up top. Up top to the second floor. And Immortals realizes it. Look, they just saw it. They saw the Winston and the Soldier up there, And now they're kind of in a situation where at this point they should have been like, okay guys, we have to clear that. There's still 11 seconds left. That's plenty of time. Send, I don't know, maybe 3 people up there. Heck, if you wanted to, you could send 5 to clear that high ground. Maybe even 6, although I wouldn't like that. But clear that off and then kind of reset and start rotating based off that. Start, repositioning, remaneuver. The fight kind of resets at that point. Instead, they kind of get stuck here. Doomfist goes for the poke. Obviously, Doomfist does not excel here, especially versus the soldier. And now the clock's ticking. Now they're in desperation mode. They don't have a whole lot of time to clear that high ground. And so what you're going to see here is they just kind of get stuck. Now, again, credit where credit is due. They do a pretty good job of being patient and not going too far deep. Although Doomfist just now went a little too deep, maybe. Yeah, definitely. But whatever, he was going for a play. Now he's going for that same play again. This time it works out, and you would think, oh, cool, Immortals is going to win this. But no, because Immortals just went into this space, which Rogue has the positional advantage. That soldier's up there completely uncontested. No one's dealing with him, and then Rogue just brings this back. So the moment Immortals didn't take the opportunity to clear that high ground, because there was time. There was a moment where they had the ability to recognize that and say, hey guys, we need to clear that high ground. Then this fight goes way better. It's at least a 50-50. Whereas in this case, Immortals was going to have to really outplay mechanically their opponents to win this, which they did not. So Rogue takes this one pretty easy, even with that nice kill that Doomfist got. So yeah, so, it's really important that you understand space and that you understand, when you can kind of go into a space and when not to. Cool. Hope that makes sense. Let's look at our last example, which is Miro's Winston. One of the best Winstons in the world, probably, right? So what you're going to see here is Lunatic High's very good understanding of how to position when a fight is starting. So, okay, so there you just saw Winston. He just jumped from this location, over here, to here, where he is now, right there. Now, this is awesome, because in this situation, I guarantee you, a lot of Winstons would have just jumped into their opponents, possibly just died and been like, what the heck, team? Like, you suck. And what Miro realized was that he had to be close to the fight because the fight's about to start, so he needs to be set up, he needs to be in a position to get there right away, but he couldn't just walk there, because if he walks there, he takes a ton of incoming fire, or he has to burn his bubble way too early, and that sucks. So instead, he gets closer to his opponents onto this neutral ground, and then from there, he can decide, to engage, when to engage, because he's closer to the fight, so he doesn't have to burn his jump, like right away, because he also could have just waited here and then gone for the jump, which is better than the other options we presented earlier. But this one's nicer because he can be into the fight the moment it starts with his cooldown intact, and if he needs to use it, he can do the short jump by holding S and then still getting the damage as necessary. So by doing this, he has more options, and he's in a safe space, relatively safe space. And again, he can start the fight whenever he wants. And not to mention that if you did do this jump, if you waited here to go for this jump, there's airtime where he can take damage, whereas this is a bit shorter airtime. So just super high level Winston play here. And it's cool because, again, he understood what space was available to him and he used it. So just really, really good. So I'm going to wrap up now just with some final advice. Don't stress out too much about these concepts. Overwatch is such a fast-paced, dynamic game. Everything is in flux. Things are constantly, changing from, contested to uncontested, your space to the enemy space, and it's all just, it's crazy. So my goal here isn't to make you kind of think about these things in the moment, so rigidly. I want you to just kind of have a basic understanding, a foundation to build from, and as time goes on, these things will just become instinct. But before it becomes instinct, you kind of need to be aware of it first, be a bit studious, and then with time, this will grow, and you'll be so good at recognizing, oh, I need to go there now, I need to go there now, or I can't go there now, I need to wrap around this way, etc., etc. So hopefully this was educational. If you liked the video, please like it, and please subscribe. Thank you.